Hello guys and welcome back to History Revision Success. So today I'm going to focus on the first part of topic 1 of the Cambridge IGCSE course. So this is going to look precisely and most specifically at what were the main aims and what was the background and how did that influence the aims of those big three who sat at the Treaty of Versailles. So it's the topic of the Treaty of Versailles, and we're going to hopefully get through that first kind of angle. So just so you know, just so it's contextualized for you, there are kind of 5 main questions you need to know the answer to for this course, this topic 1. What were the motives and aims of the big three? Why did they not get everything they wanted? What was the impact of the Treaty of Versailles on Germany? And then could the treaty be justified? Was the treaty fair? So all of those questions could be asked in your 4, 6 or 10 mark questions. So who actually were the big three? Well, we have Woodrow Wilson, who was a Democrat and the president of the United States. He was also someone we might refer to as an idealist and reformer. So he believed in reform, and he often has been brandished or has been blamed for being too idealistic, for thinking about things beyond the realms of possibility. Then we have David Lloyd George, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain. He was a member of the Liberal Party. His election campaign was won off the back of this mantra of make them pay. Okay, so we're thinking all the time about who they are and why their background might influence what they wanted at this treaty. So if he's shown the British public, he's promised the British public he's going to make Germany pay, therefore he might need to be slightly harsher in his demands at Versailles. Finally, we have Georges Clemenceau, who was the leader of France at this time. He is sometimes referred to as the Tiger, just so you're aware in case you come across that phrasing. That was his nickname. Now, we also have another man who's sometimes regarded as being part of the Big Four. He was the Italian Prime Minister Vittorio Emanuele Orlando. Sometimes we include him, sometimes we don't. So we talk about the big 4, or perhaps we talk about the big 3, because he didn't play a particularly prominent role. He wasn't able to get what Italy wanted out of the Treaty of Versailles. And the big 3, Wilson, George, and Clemenceau, were definitely more in control of the discussions. So where were Germany? What were the Central Powers doing at this meeting? Well, Germany was actually not invited to the meeting. So 75% of the world were represented at Versailles. However, the defeated powers were purposefully excluded. So Germany, Austria-Hungary, Turkey, and Bulgaria, none of them were invited. That's why Germany see the treaty as a diktat, a dictated peace. It was told to them. They did not have a say or a choice in the matter. So what did these people want? Well, essentially, fundamentally, in 2 words, they wanted different things, which is why we had problems and why we had clashes. Starting with Woodrow Wilson. So Woodrow Wilson had recently written his 14 points. So he wanted to put his 14 points into action at Versailles. Now, he wrote his 14 points on January the 8th of 1918, and they were essentially a list of 14 things he wanted to see in the post-war world. Things like principles for peace, he wanted freedom of the seas, and he wanted self-determination. So one of the tricks you can do with this course when you learn your evidence is you can make sure you choose the evidence that will be the most helpful to you. So for example, I've chosen these examples because freedom of the seas he's unable to achieve because it's blocked by David Lloyd George. But if you watch a following video on did they get what they want, I'll go through that. However, that's a really good one to remember because it's A, an example of the 14 points, B, an example of what he wanted at Versailles, and C, an example of where David Lloyd George forced him to compromise. And self-determination, because we do achieve self-determination for many of those smaller countries like Lithuania and Latvia. However, Germany, Austria-Hungary arguably don't achieve self-determination. So that's another really good one to remember. He wanted this treaty to achieve a lasting peace. He didn't want, therefore, to punish Germany too harshly. He thought arguably quite rightly, that would have repercussions later down the line, particularly economically. He thought the reparations should not be too high to cripple Germany. He wanted to make sure they could recover as a nation and as an economy. He was very wary of allowing communist groups to gain a footing. So therefore, that's another thing that pushed him towards wanting a more lenient treaty. Because obviously, if we have a situation where people are pushed to the extremes because they're so unhappy, which is arguably what happens in Germany, they're pushed to the left and the right. Communism, extremist groups will be more likely to become popular. And he wanted self-determination, as in his 14 points. Self-determination meaning when a country is able to rule itself, so they are not ruled by a colonial power or by somebody else, for example, in Poland and Slovakia. He also wanted to create a League of Nations, which is a whole topic in itself. We look at topic 2 in the Cambridge IGCSE course, but obviously that for him is kind of a world parliament, a group where international peace can be discussed and protected and future conflicts can be prevented. David Lloyd George. So David Lloyd George was under huge pressure from home, from Britain, firstly because of his Make Them Pay election campaign, where he promised to be harsh on Germany, but also because for the last 4 years, Britain has been bombarded with anti-German propaganda. They were trying to increase patriotism and motivation for the war effort, so they produced lots and lots of propaganda meaning leaflets and posters and messages that were supposed to change your mind and influence you. All of that was influencing people to be against Germany. So it was hard to suddenly say, for all these, past 4 years, we've been against Germany, and now we're going to think about them kindly, be lenient on them. So therefore, he had huge pressure from home. However, on the other hand, he did want to protect British and German trade. It was an important trading partner. He wanted to ensure German industry was still strong enough that they could trade with Britain in the future. Another big concern for him was protecting British imperial interests. For example, ensuring that the German Navy was eliminated, so Britain's Navy remained the most powerful in the world, trying to get a hold of some of the colonial or the colonies that Germany had to add to the British Empire. It was a time where Britain was trying to retain that place as a kind of, nation of the sea and the imperial power that it had been for the last kind of century. And finally, George Clemenceau. Well, George Clemenceau was by his own nature, a very hard and tough politician. He'd also been through a very significantly different experience than every other one of these leaders. France had suffered significantly during occupation. They're the only country of the 3 who were actually occupied by Germany. And they suffered hugely because of that. So as examples, and these are really good facts to learn, either for your 4-mark question or your 6 or your 10, if you're having to show why George Clemenceau wanted a harsh treaty. Well, 2.5 million hectares of French agriculture was destroyed, which is 50% of all of the French farming land in France. That's going to be hugely devastating to their economy moving forward. 20,000 industrial compounds. They were in 33 billion francs of debt, which is why they wanted high reparations to try and pay off some of that debt. 1.6 million French soldiers were killed. That's in comparison to kind of almost, or less, I'm trying to work out that maths calculation, less than half, I think. Britain suffered less than half of that in terms of their own casualties. Only 750,000 soldiers died. So that shows the kind of devastation felt by France, the loss of life moving forward, the loss of kind of manpower and labor, trying to kind of rebuild the economy, rebuild the industry. And they also lost 3.3% of the entire population when we include civilians. Now that again is the highest of all of the Allies. They suffered hugely in terms of, the physical and the emotional impact of having been occupied by Germany in the war. Therefore, there was really a feeling that they wanted to punish Germany as much as possible after the war was over. They were also really desperate to make sure Germany could never invade them again. They were very worried about their eastern border, the border that they share with Germany, and they wanted to make sure that was as strengthened as possible against the German invasion in the future. For the similar reasons, he wanted specifically that the Rhineland became an independent state. That's really a good fact to remember for moving forward to the other later questions where we think about how far were his aims met, because it wasn't met to the full extent that Clemenceau wanted. He also wanted French control of the Tsar. They wanted Danzig to be given to Poland, and they wanted the armed forces to be significantly limited and reduced. So they are the specific things you can put down, if you are asked either how far were Clemenceau's aims met or what did Clemenceau want. Okay, so the other one last reason I wanted to bring up in terms of why a harsh treaty was being sought by these men was because of Germany's actions with the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk during the war itself. So Germany, on the surrender of Russia, because of the kind of the rise of Lenin in Russia, Lenin sought a peace with Germany, and they were handed this Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Now, this was arguably one of the harshest treaties, harsher arguably than the Treaty of Versailles. Russia lost 54% of her industry, 34% of her population, were made to pay 300 million rubles. And therefore, we can suggest that actually Germany had set a precedent of serving a harsh peace treaty to someone they were victorious over. Now, there's another argument as well that actually Germany during this war had suffered huge amounts of debt. That they paid a huge amount of money. They spent 37 billion US dollars during World War One, and they were unable to pay that back. They'd essentially funded this war by printing money. They did that because they believed they could prevent hyperinflation and they could recoup the money from the other countries when they were victorious in their peace settlement, and that the reparations they would charge upon the defeated nations would be very, very high. So for the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and this secondary reason, these were two other factors that pushed the big three into wanting a harsh treaty, most notably Clemenceau. Hopefully that was helpful for you. If you have any questions, please do leave me a comment and I'll try and get back to you. And if this is useful, I will continue making videos in this series for the Cambridge IGCSE, and I will move on to another video on how far were the aims met. So yeah, like the video so I know this is something that you want to see. Thank you.